Hello students, and today we are going to talk about sampling. So what is sampling? Sampling is basically a procedure in which we take into account a small group of people which we call the sample instead of the whole population which we call the universe. So basically why is the sampling performed? Sampling is performed so that we can do the task easily, we can do the task in a very large scale. Like if we, for example, if we take a data of like 1 lakh people, we can't really take 1 lakh people and go and ask around 1 lakh people. I mean, we can do that, but at the same time that's very hectic. I know the country does that at a very large scale when they produce the census, but at the same time this is not really effective when we need a data in a very short span of time. For example, if you're performing a research, you can't go to 1 lakh people for the 7 years of your life and go and ask about a particular data. This has two big problems. One, this has higher chances of inaccuracy, which is a very big problem. The more the data you have, the more chances of inaccuracy you will face. Why? Because, for example, if one viewer has one viewpoint and the other doesn't match, you'll have to make a different category for that. Whereas, if you have a sample population and you take into consideration of their biasness, there's somewhere or the other you get a particular data which is kind of accurate, I would say. And the second thing, it saves a lot of time. It saves a lot of time. Time is a very big factor. You can't go on to a research for years and years. You have to stop at a particular point of time, which you can't really do when it comes to a large population of census. A government can do that, but an individual cannot. So that's why we take a sample population into consideration. Number three, it saves a lot of money. It is cost effective. If you're doing a research alone and individually, then I purposely think that it's very important for a person to understand the fact that you can't really spend all of your money into traveling, and then collecting each and every data. I mean, you can do that if you have that much of money, but not everyone does, and that is not really convenient. Another thing about sampling is that it really gives us a particular viewpoint about the whole data. For example, sampling can be divided into two parts. One is the simple sampling, or like the simple sampling, like the random sampling, which is, and there is the non-random sampling. They have things like judgments and stuff, not really important right now. So today we are going to discuss about simple sampling. What is simple sampling? So when we think about simple sampling, it's basically simple sampling. There's no much of a work to do, and it's way more effective than I won't say effective, but easier when it comes to non-random sampling. So in simple sampling, what is simple sampling first? Simple sampling is basically when you take a data. For example, if we take a data of 4,000 people and there are 500 girls and 3,500 boys, I would say that's a very skewed data. If we take 4,000 people of data, where 2,000 are boys and 2,000 are girls, then we would take one guy and one girl from each of the category. So we would take two genders into categorization, and at the same time, a boy's interest can be met by a single boy and the girl's interest can be met by a single girl. I know that's not effective at the same time, but at the same time you have to take into consideration about the fact that at least it's possible. If you are given a day of time and you think about considering 4,000 people's data, first thing, managing would be really complicated. So administration of the data is very complicated. Second is how the data is being processed. It's very difficult to process that much amount of data, because the more amount of data is the more amount of deviation from the central point. And if the central point is deviated, you have to understand the fact that the data would take more amount of time consumption. So we take this thing. So the first category of simple sampling is called simple random sampling. Sorry, the first category of random sampling is simple random sampling. Okay, so what is simple random sampling? Simple random sampling is basically what we discussed right now. It's very simple. We take a group of people, we take a bunch of examples from here and there, and that is how we get the data. What are the merits? As we discussed, one is administration, second is time, third is cost, fourth is the effectiveness, and fifth is chances of inaccuracy. So, why are the chances of inaccuracy less? You would say that the lesser amount of data, that means there would be lesser chance of inaccuracy, right? Because you're not getting proper amount of high data. But at the same time, if you have to take into consideration, if we can take 2 samples from 4,000 people, examining and determining these 2 samples is way easier than examining and determining those rest 3,998 all together with that also 2. So if we take into 2 into consideration, there would be a particular thing that would be effective, that is we can study these 2 people way more effectively, which we can't if we have a larger amount of data. It's basically like when we go to a Viva room and there are multiple, like if our college has 200 people, the Viva person or the person that is taking the Viva would not get that much amount of time, but at the same time, if there are 5 people giving a Viva, he would get a very detailed Viva option. So he would ask more definitive questions, he would get more time to interact, and the interaction would be better. So that is why, like, there's a difference between going out for a group interview and there's a difference between going out to a civil servant interview where they ask you definitive questions, because it's 4:1 ratio, 4 people asking question to 1 person. So that is done with that. The next thing that we need to take into consideration is we are done with the simple sampling. Simple sampling is basically this simple stuff that we take into consideration. Yeah. Simple sampling can be divided into 2 parts. One is lottery and another is restricted. So what is lottery? I guess it's restricted, right? No. Table of random numbers. It's not restricted. It's table of random numbers. What is lottery? As I said about the simple random sampling, that is basically lottery, and table of random numbers is something different. So this was invented by L.H.C. Tippett in the year of 1942, I guess. Basically what he did was he took into consideration of 10,400 people. Okay, so basically in the lottery type, you basically do nothing but pick a bunch of people, take a bunch of options. For example, if there are a bunch of 50 people, okay, and then we make 50 chits, or we make equal chits, like 10 chits for red, 10, or like we don't make any chits, basically give random things. For example, there are 50 people, and then we give them a bunch of chits to pick from. So there is no personal biasness here because they are randomly picked, and we give them a blindfold and they pick up 1 chit and 1 chit. For example, if we are talking about what color they want to wear, if they pick up a random chit, for example, there are 4 boxes, red, yellow, green, blue, and they pick up 1 random chit from blue, so if they don't really have a choice there, and we don't really are controlling anything about it. So there are equal number of opportunities. There are 50 chits of blue, 50 chits of red, 50 chits of green, 50 chits of yellow. So at the same time, there are 200 chits, but at the same time, 1 person can choose only 1. So at the end of the thing, we would look at how many random things we have received, and this would also give an equal representative to the red, green, blue, yellow. So there are no biasness here, neither from our side, neither from their side. That is called the lottery thing, and let's talk about the table of random numbers. So the table of random numbers, as I said, was given by L.H.C. Tippett in the year of 1942. What he basically said was, for example, if we have a data, which is a large data. So the problem about the lottery system is this cannot be performed in an infinite universe. You cannot perform this in an infinite universe. You have to have a set of data like 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 1 lakh people, or anything but a single representative data. You can't get everything here. So in the table of random numbers, we have to take into consideration is what L.H.C. Tippett said, is that, for example, if we have he used this thing in the British census, okay? He used 14,000, no, it was 10,400 given a particular 4 digit. And then the 10,404 gives us 41,600. This was the total data. Same time, this was random. This was not on their choice. 10,400 people were given a particular 4 digit data, and then the rest 10,400 a particular, and this gave a big bunch of data, like a big chunk of data, which we could understand by this. The next thing that we need to consider is this has been done. Well, there can be other options too, like 25,000 people giving a random 4 digit data, so you have 1 lakh data, and 50,000 people given a random data of 4 digit, so you'll get 2 lakh. Yeah, that is how this works. So now we are done with simple sampling. Simple.